Ever imagine North America is just one, like, giant nation, you know, stretching all the way from the Arctic down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
Not the United States as we know it, though.
Yeah.
More like a uh, massive social democratic commonwealth.
Hmm.
It might not be as crazy as it sounds.
Mhm.
Some historians actually suggest that's what could happen, if the American Revolution never happened.
It really makes you think differently about the whole American Revolution, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, was this fight for liberty the one we all learn about? Was it actually a mistake in the long run?
And that is exactly what we're diving into today.
Oh,
We're going to be peeling back all the layers of the American Revolution.
okay.
So we're going beyond just the typical story of triumph
Yeah.
and looking at it more as this turning point, one with consequences that we're still dealing with today.
Interesting.
And to do that, we've got a ton of sources like historical accounts, firsthand stories. We've even got some economic analyses.
Wow, that's a lot to dig into.
It is.
So we're going to unpack all the different motivations behind this revolution, right? Like those make or break moments that changed everything.
Okay.
And the huge impact it had not just on those 13 colonies, but on the whole world.
But first, could Britain have actually won the war? I mean, yeah, we know how it ended, but some historians say Britain was fighting an uphill battle right from the start.
Yeah.
These colonies were huge geographically all over the place, just a logistical nightmare to try and control.
You got to remember what was happening back then. Britain was already dealing with people disagreeing with them back home
Yeah.
and trying to, show their power across the Atlantic. Well, that was expensive and really complicated.
Right.
It's kind of like trying to run a business where your employees are spread out all over a continent, each with their own ideas of how things should be.
Okay, so it wasn't as simple as Britain just sending more troops.
No, not at all.
Hmm.
And that brings us to Valley Forge. Everyone knows that name, right?
Yeah.
It means hardship, resilience. We all picture Washington kneeling in the snow, right?
Yeah.
But there's another side to Valley Forge,
Oh.
a story that we don't hear enough about.
This is where we get to the unsung heroes of the revolution.
Okay.
The women. They weren't just waiting around at home. They were busy, really involved in, keeping the Continental Army going. They took care of the wounded. They supplied food, kept morale up day. They were basically the backbone of the whole thing.
There's this really powerful description from Thomas Paine. He compares Valley Forge to a family of beavers all working together. It's a nice way to show that spirit of, community and just pure determination that helped the revolution survive those tough early years.
But the revolution's legacy, it wasn't the same for everyone, was it? Like, freedom for some meant something totally different for others.
Yeah, that's true. While it brought liberty and, self-determination for a lot of colonists, for marginalized groups, it was a different story. Think about women, for example. Abigail Adams, she famously asked her husband, John, to remember the ladies when they were creating the new nation.
Right.
She was fighting for their rights, their representation.
And what did John say to that?
He basically said, "Don't worry your pretty little head about politics." It shows you even a revolution for liberty could still ignore deeply rooted inequality.
So even though it was a revolution, the fight for women's equality didn't just end there?
No, it didn't. And for Native Americans, the revolution was terrible. Caught between these two warring empires, they had to deal with broken treaties, forced removals from their land, and their autonomy just kept getting chipped away.
It's just tragic how a war fought for freedom ended up taking away the freedom of so many Native Americans. And their stories, they're crucial to understanding what this period really meant.
Absolutely. And then there's slavery, maybe the biggest contradiction in the whole revolution. On one hand, the war made some people think about abolishing slavery, but for many, slavery just stayed put.
We can't forget about figures like Harry Washington. He was George Washington's slave, his valet, actually. He escaped and joined the British, hoping to get his freedom.
Right.
Liberty wore a red coat. Powerful, isn't it?
It is.
Shows just how complicated those times were.
Definitely.
And for African Americans, the promise of liberty, well, it mostly went unfulfilled. It's crazy to think what started as a colonial rebellion turned into this global conflict.
I know.
It wasn't just about those 13 colonies. It was a world war in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Spain saw this as their chance to get back at Britain. They had wanted Gibraltar for ages, and this was the perfect opportunity. Plus, weakening Britain on the world stage, well, that was appealing too.
It's amazing how a conflict in North America could have such a big impact on Europe.
It really is.
And France, their involvement, that was a costly decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, really costly.
Yeah.
Supporting the Americans, financially, it was a huge burden. And it actually contributed to France's own revolution a few years later.
So the American Revolution, it was like a domino effect, setting off revolutions around the world.
In some ways, yes. It changed the balance of power not just in North America, but globally. It's a good reminder that events in history are almost never isolated. They're all connected, often in ways we don't even realize.
And speaking of connections, let's talk about John Paul Jones. He might not be a household name, but he was an American naval captain who raided British coastal towns. Adds a whole other layer to the story, don't you think?
It does.
A bit of daring, adventure, pure guts.
It reminds us that history is more than just dates and creeds. It's about people. And their stories, like John Paul Jones, they help us connect with the past in a more real way.
Okay, so Yorktown, British surrender. You'd think the peace talks would be tense, right?
Yeah.
With Britain trying to get back some of what they'd lost.
You'd expect some bitterness, some desire for payback. But get this, they offered the new United States some pretty amazing terms. They actually gave them huge amounts of land stretching westward.
Wait, really? Why would they do that? It's like rewarding the people who just beat them.
It was strategic,
Okay.
a calculated move. They knew a strong, independent America could actually work in their favor. It could be a buffer against France and Spain in North America. And they thought a good trading partner. It was a gamble, but it ended up shaping the future of both countries.
So it wasn't about being nice. It was a smart move on the world stage.
It was realpolitik at its finest. And those vast territories they gave the U.S., well, that had a huge impact on their history. It led to westward expansion, conflicts with Native Americans, even the Mexican-American War. It all started with the decisions made after the revolution.
So we've got this new nation, lots of land, lots of potential. But as we said, the Articles of Confederation, they weren't exactly doing a great job of holding things together. It seems like they were destined to fail.
Well, the people who wrote the Articles, they really didn't trust strong central governments. Remember, they just fought a war to escape that. So they created a weak central government on purpose, leaving most of the power with the individual states. It was basically 13 separate countries trying to work together, but with no one really in charge.
So it's like a house full of teenagers. Everyone wants freedom, but no one wants to do the chores.
Haha, exactly. And naturally, things got messy. Trade wars between states, a shaky economy, and then Shays' Rebellion happened. That really showed how fragile the whole system was. Armed farmers shutting down courts, protesting taxes, it was chaotic.
It sounds like the nation was close to falling apart.
They were on the brink. Shays' Rebellion was a wake-up call.
Right.
It was obvious they needed a stronger, more unified government if they wanted to survive.
Which brings us to the Constitutional Convention, right? That meeting in Philadelphia, it changed everything for America.
It did. Think about the people there. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin. Brilliant minds all coming together to figure out how to build a government. They were trying to balance individual freedom with national unity, state power versus federal power. Tough questions, no easy answers.
That's been pretty intense.
It was. Imagine being stuck in a hot Philadelphia summer with all those expectations, the future of a whole nation on your shoulders. They debated, argued, compromised, and in the end, they created a document that has lasted for centuries.
And the Constitution, it was more than just a document, right? It was a whole new kind of government, a system that still influences democracies all over the world.
Absolutely. It's proof of the power of ideas and the lasting legacy of that revolutionary era.
But creating the Constitution, that was just the start. There's more to the story.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more to tell.
Okay, so we'll have to say that for part 2 of our deep dive.
We'll be back to talk about those debates, figures like Hamilton and Jefferson, and the impact of the Constitution. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the American Revolution.
So last time we were talking about how creating a new nation, well, it was a lot tougher than just declaring independence.
Oh yeah, for sure. Uniting those 13 colonies, getting them to act as one country, that was a whole other challenge.
It sounds like it.
To really understand how hard that was, we need to look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
We touched on Spain wanting to take back Gibraltar and weaken Britain.
Right.
But the story goes even further than that. Imagine, picture the world map in the late 1700s. You see all these alliances changing, old rivalries popping up again. The American Revolution, it wasn't just some colonies rebelling. It was like this catalyst that shook up the whole world order.
So like a ripple effect, starting in those colonies and spreading out.
Yeah, exactly. You had countries like Russia and Denmark. They formed this League of Armed Neutrality.
They were basically teaming up against Britain to challenge their control of the seas. Britain had enemies everywhere.
Wow.
It just shows how something that seems like it's happening in one place can impact the whole world.
It makes you wonder, if things in North America went differently, would the world map look different today?
That's a big question that historians are still debating.
Yeah.
But let's go back to those peace talks after Yorktown for a second.
Okay.
It's really interesting how Britain, even though they lost, they still managed to come out of it pretty well. You'd think they'd be out for revenge, right? Wanting to punish the colonies.
Well, yeah, I'd be pretty mad if I were them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead of, seeking revenge or anything, they actually gave the U.S. some pretty generous terms in the peace treaty, including, massive amounts of land going westward.
Wait, hold on. Remind me why they did that again.
Think of it as a long-term plan.
Okay.
They knew a strong, independent America could actually be useful to them, a buffer against France and Spain in North America.
Right.
And they saw them as a potential trading partner, too. It was a risk, but a calculated one, and it shaped the future of both countries.
So it wasn't about being nice. It was about protecting their own interests. It's kind of wild how geopolitics can influence, even something as basic as peace terms.
Absolutely. It's a classic example of real politics. And we all know that westward expansion, the one granted in that peace treaty, well, it was a big deal in American history.
Right.
It drove that idea of manifest destiny, led to conflicts with Native Americans, and eventually started the Mexican-American War. It's a whole chain of events that can be traced back to those decisions made right after the revolution.
Right. So we've got this new nation, tons of land, so much potential. But like we've been saying, those Articles of Confederation, they weren't exactly holding things together very well. It almost seems like they were set up for failure from the beginning.
Well, yeah, the people who created those articles, they were really wary of giving too much power to a central government. I mean, remember, they just fought a war to get away from that kind of control.
Right, yeah.
So they deliberately created a weak central government and gave most of the power to each individual state.
Okay.
It was almost like 13 mini-countries trying to work together, but no one had any real authority to make them stick to agreements or settle disputes.
So like a bunch of teenagers living together.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to do their own thing, but no one wants to clean up or be responsible.
Yeah, perfect analogy. And, well, things started to fall apart.
Yeah.
Had those trade wars between states, a really unstable economy, and then, bam, Shays' Rebellion happened. That showed everyone just how fragile this system really was. You had armed farmers shutting down courts, protesting taxes. It was pure chaos.
So it sounds like the nation was close to falling apart.
They were right on the edge. Shays' Rebellion was a serious wake-up call for a lot of people. They finally realized that a stronger, more unified government was absolutely essential if the nation was going to survive.
And that leads us to the Constitutional Convention, right?
Yeah,
That gathering of delegates in Philadelphia, that was a turning point in American history.
absolutely. You had figures like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin,
Wow.
all these brilliant minds in one room trying to figure out how to build a government. They were wrestling with the big questions: how to balance individual liberty and national unity, state power versus federal power. No easy answers to any of it.
I bet it was intense.
Oh, it was. Imagine being in that room, hot Philadelphia summer, all that pressure, the future of the whole nation resting on their shoulders. They argued, debated, compromised, and they eventually came up with a document that has stood the test of time.
And the Constitution, it was more than just words on paper, right? It was a new type of government,
Yeah,
a model that still influences democracies around the world.
totally. It's a testament to how powerful ideas can be and the lasting impact of that whole revolutionary era.
But writing the Constitution, that was just the first step, right?
Yeah, just at the beginning.
Okay, so tell me, what happened next?
Well, we'll have to dive into that after the break.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment to talk about the challenges of actually putting that new system into practice, the rise of political parties, and of course, that looming issue of slavery, an issue that would continue to cast a shadow over the young nation. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about the American Revolution, and it's pretty clear that creating a new nation, well, it was way more complicated than just saying we're independent.
Oh, yeah. It was a huge, massive project. 13 colonies, each one with its own identity, its own way of doing things, trying to all become one country.
Right.
It was bound to cause some friction, and we've seen how that played out, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you can't talk about this period without talking about George Washington. He's often made out to be this almost mythical figure, the steady leader who got the nation through those early years.
He's become an icon, right?
Yeah.
The guy who could have been king but decided to step down, go back to his farm.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful image, putting the country first, ahead of his own ambition.
It is, but it's interesting to think, was Washington really that exceptional, or was he maybe, a product of his time?
Interesting.
Someone who just happened to be there when the new nation really needed a symbol of unity, a leader to rally around.
So he was both a leader who shaped events and also a product of the events themselves.
Exactly. He definitely had qualities that were really important in those early days: courage, integrity, that strong sense of duty. But he was also operating in a very specific historical context, when the nation was desperate for stability and a sense of unity.
Right.
And think about it. His decision to step down after 2 terms as president, that set a huge precedent, reinforced the idea that the military answers to civilian leaders, and paved the way for peaceful transfers of power.
It makes you wonder how things would have turned out if someone else had been in charge.
Yeah.
Someone that, not as committed to Republican ideals. It's a real what-if moment in history.
It is. But even with Washington's leadership, the new nation had tons of problems. Internal divisions, economic struggles, and of course, the whole issue of slavery. Those things could easily torn the young republic apart.
It seems like they were always facing some kind of crisis back then.
That's a good way to put it. And those challenges, they forced Americans to really look at themselves, to confront their own contradictions, and try to figure out how to build a truly just and equal society.
Right.
Those ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, self-government, they were great goals.
Yeah,
But actually putting them into practice, well, that was a whole different ballgame.
absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the American Revolution, it's worth thinking about the legacy of this period.
Okay.
The Revolution, it inspired people all over the world.
It did.
It fueled other independence movements and calls for democratic reforms.
Yeah.
But it also left some unfinished business behind.
Yeah, that's true. Not dealing with slavery, that was a huge misstep. It would shape the country's politics and society for generations to come. And that fight for a more perfect union, a society that actually lives up to those revolutionary ideals, well, that fight is still going on today.
So what can we take away from all of this? How can understanding this period with all its complexities and, contradictions help us face the challenges we have today?
I think the most important takeaway is that history isn't just a bunch of dates and names in a textbook. It's a living story that's still shaping our world.
Hmm.
When we engage with the past, when we grapple with its complexities, we can learn so much about ourselves, about the world we live in.
It reminds us that learning and understanding, that journey never really ends.
That's right.
And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the American Revolution.
But that doesn't mean the conversation has to end. We really encourage you to keep exploring, to look deeper into the things we've talked about, to keep asking those questions.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll be back soon with another fascinating look into the untold stories of history.